Sayaka had listened to his apology and his plea for assistance with the calm attention of someone who had anticipated this exact conversation. Her response, when it came, was both generous and terrifying in its implications. She offered him employment at her company, a position that would allow him to rebuild his career, while providing her with something she had discovered. She wanted even more than simple revenge. The terms she proposed were non-negotiable. James would work directly under her supervision, starting at an entry-level salary despite his experience and previous responsibilities. He would be entirely dependent on her evaluation for any future advancement, and his continued employment would require absolute compliance with her professional direction. James had accepted these conditions with the gratitude of someone who understood that he was being offered not just a job, but the possibility of redemption, even if that redemption came at the cost of complete professional subordination to the woman he had betrayed. As Sayaka finished describing this development, I noticed that her expression had become more complex, carrying emotions that seemed to surprise even her. The satisfaction of successful revenge was clearly present, but it was accompanied by something else: the uncertainty about what she had actually achieved, and what she planned to do with the power she had so carefully constructed. "The truth is," she said, her voice dropping to the tone people use when sharing thoughts, "they haven't yet fully examined themselves. I'm not entirely certain whether this was revenge or something else entirely." The admission hung between us like a question that neither of us was qualified to answer. Sayaka had systematically destroyed James's life, and then positioned herself as his only path to recovery, creating a dynamic that was simultaneously punitive and protective, distant and intimate. "Perhaps," she continued, "what I really wanted was not to hurt him, but to ensure that he could never leave me again." The psychological complexity of what she had achieved began to reveal itself as she spoke. By reducing James to complete dependence on her professional favor, Sayaka had created a relationship dynamic that guaranteed her permanent centrality in his life. He could not succeed without her approval, could not even survive financially without her continued support. It was, she realized, a form of possession, far more complete than anything they had shared during their original relationship. Then, James had been free to choose between her and Emma, and he had chosen Emma. Now, he had no choices at all except those that Sayaka permitted him to make. The cafe around us had grown quieter as the afternoon progressed, and I noticed that other customers had gradually departed, leaving us alone with the weight of Sayaka's revelations. The story she had shared challenged simple categories of justice and revenge, moving into psychological territory that was both fascinating and disturbing. "He starts work next week," she said, and I could hear in her voice both anticipation and a kind of fear. "I'm not sure what will happen when we see each other every day." The practical implications of their new arrangement were staggering to consider. James would report to work each morning, knowing that his former partner now controlled not only his professional future but his basic financial survival. Sayaka would exercise authority over someone who had once been her equal, directing his activities and evaluating his performance, with the absolute power that comes from complete economic dependency. But beneath these practical considerations lay emotional complexities that neither of them had probably fully anticipated. Sayaka had admitted that her feelings for James were not entirely resolved, that revenge and affection had become so intertwined in her mind that she could no longer clearly distinguish between them. The relationship she had engineered would force them into daily contact, while maintaining a power dynamic that made any normal emotional resolution impossible. She would see him every day, speak with him regularly, observe his reactions and responses to her authority, but all within a framework that made genuine intimacy or forgiveness extremely difficult to achieve. As our conversation drew toward its natural conclusion, I found myself both impressed by Sayaka's strategic brilliance, and troubled by the psychological prison she had constructed on that would confine not only James but potentially herself as well. She had achieved what she described as perfect revenge, but the perfect revenge had required her to remain permanently connected to the person who had hurt her. The irony was elegant and terrible. By ensuring that James could never leave her again, Sayaka had also ensured that she could never fully move beyond their relationship. She had traded the possibility of healing and new beginnings for the guarantee of ongoing control, and the daily experience of managing someone who represented both her greatest disappointment and her most persistent attachment. "I should return to the office," she said, finally, glancing at her watch with the kind of purposeful movement that indicates a conversation's end. "Thank you for listening. I haven't been able to discuss this with anyone else." As we prepared to leave the cafe, I realized that Sayaka's story would continue unfolding long after our conversation ended. The relationship she had engineered between herself and James was not a conclusion, but a beginning start of a daily negotiation between power and vulnerability, control and affection, justice and mercy. Walking back toward the station, I reflected on what Sayaka had shared with me, and what it revealed about the particular ways that intelligent people can respond to emotional injury. Her approach had been methodical and comprehensive, addressing not only the immediate hurt of betrayal, but the deeper fear of powerlessness that such betrayal creates. But I wondered whether the control she had achieved would ultimately prove more satisfying than the freedom she had sacrificed to obtain it. By making herself essential to James's survival, she had also made him essential to her own sense of having successfully overcome their shared history. The story she had told me was remarkable for its strategic sophistication, but it was also a reminder that the most elaborate forms of revenge often trap their architects as completely as they trap their targets. Sayaka had won a victory, so complete that it required her permanent engagement in the war. As my train departed Okayama Station, carrying me back toward Tokyo and the familiar routines of my own life, I found myself thinking about the cafe conversation that would remain with me long after the business details of my trip had been forgotten. Sayaka had shared something more than a story of revenge. She had revealed the particular form of human complexity that emerges when intelligence and emotional injury combine. With sufficient time for careful planning, the tale was far from over. Next week, James would report to work under Sayaka's supervision, beginning a relationship that was simultaneously professional and deeply personal, punitive and potentially redemptive. The dynamics they would establish in those first days would determine whether her elaborate revenge would evolve into something like reconciliation, or deepen into a more subtle and ongoing form of mutual imprisonment. The train windows reflected the countryside passing outside, and I realized that some stories resist simple moral evaluation. Sayaka's actions had been both justified and troubling, both brilliant and potentially self-destructive. She had created a situation that gave her everything she had claimed to want, while possibly preventing her from achieving the peace that might have been more valuable than victory. The next chapter of their story was yet to be written, and I suspected that neither Sayaka nor James fully understood what they were about to experience together. But whatever unfolded in that office in Okayama would be the direct result of choices made carefully over months and years, choices that demonstrated both the terrible power of patient planning and the unpredictable complexity of human hearts that cannot always distinguish between love and possession, justice and control.